fertilizer, that's organic fertilizer. But another interesting thing is that the black soldier fly produces larvae, and this larvae is used as feed for animal. And so you'd realize that they are producing and reusing whatever they are producing, so that it's in a circular model. And I think this is really interesting. And so when we talk about, when we are initiating new solutions, new designs, new materials, or new products, we should think about how do we take out the waste. And sometimes you need to think about collaboration, and sometimes you need to attach a metric to discuss or to go through the life process of these material, this initiative, to see where we can pull out the waste factor. Yeah. So Joe, what do you have to share this time round?
I'm ready for you, Debs. This is a really interesting, in terms of how models come to life. So ARUP is a multinational construction company, and they run an innovation competition internally with their staff. And I encourage their staff, can we go back? Yeah, there we go. They encourage their staff to come up with innovative ideas to support the community or the world around them. And with regards to this one, I'm not sure if anyone's aware, but construction is an incredibly wasteful industry. So some 30% of all construction materials delivered to construction sites are wasted. When you think about the demolition of a building or the construction that happens on a site, there is so much waste, and these buildings are not designed to be dismantled. They're not designed for materials to be recovered, even if they're perfectly usable. So the really interesting thing that the team at ARUP have done is they designed a platform that they're calling DigiYard, which connects consumers and construction sites so not consumers, sorry, connects construction professionals and construction sites so that they can tackle the challenge of waste on construction sites. And it's typically designed for small scale builders, so typically in the informal sector. And the reason why that's very important is because in South Africa, where it's based, there's a massive challenge of affordable housing and low-income housing, and there's a massive housing deficit. And so getting informal traders access to these materials, which are actually very usable, but may have had the wrong specification and then just get tossed away because construction sites, it's not worth their while to try and save and harvest different materials, I think is an incredibly powerful way of both saving the environment, but also creating access and a strong social impact as well. So that is my case for DigiYard.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing. But generally respective, I think DigiYard has a nice model, an interesting one, and the fact that they also support construction, smaller construction companies to get access to materials at a lesser price. I think that's really interesting. And just saying this before the poll comes out, the poll results comes out. What do you think about DigiYard too?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're not necessarily looking at the original construction of buildings themselves. They're dealing with a situation where materials are not actually necessarily waste. So there's perfectly good materials that can be used, but they've not been able to be used for a particular site. So I don't think they're challenging the whole process, but I do think, again, it's encouraging resourcefulness, which is incredibly important. And it's encouraging people to see that everything has a value and that things should just be thrown away, because there was an amazing example they gave us of some wooden, I think it was decking they were going to use, and they'd had all this beautiful wood cut to do a really smart deck, and it had been cut short, and so all of this amazing wood that had been prepared just could no longer be used, and that would have just gone to landfill. They were able to sell it, and it was made into tables, I think, and they showed us the pictures of these tables, and they were able to go into affordable homes. But the cost of the wood, the lower income informal construction companies would never be able to afford that wood, but because it would have gone to waste, they get it at a lower price. So I think that's quite meaningful. So they can get much higher quality materials for a lower price.
Yeah, and also that means if this solution is, we are able to replicate it and it's people get a buy-in, then you don't have to go in for new materials, and so production from that end would also reduce because what is in the system is being used wisely. So that's another interesting thing to their solution too.
Yeah.
So yeah,
yes, I will end the poll and then I will launch the final question with the circularity. Which one is the more circular? Yeah. So
let's have a look at the poll results. We don't need to dwell on them too long, I don't think, because we're coming to the end. What does everyone think?
All right.
Oh, it's not looking good for me.
Yeah, so we have 75%, well, and they believe that Ecodudu designs waste out of the system. They create a closed loop. That's interesting.
I'm curious to see that a quarter of people here like the sound of delicious maggot-fed animals. I deliberately wrote it a little bit that way to.
I know.
To be.
Yeah.
A little controversial.
All
okay,
right.
Close that one, and then we can try the next one. And while the next one is being launched, Debs, you can share a little bit your thoughts on Ecodudu, and maybe it'd be interesting just to share. We had the question of, is Ecodudu replicable? I'd love to you would share what we've seen there in terms of the replicability of this business model.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, well, I believe Ecodudu, this model is really replicable because it is easy. I mean, it is easy to go to one company and say that outcome for your waste. The challenge there would now be if the company, I mean, say Ecodudu is able to deal with the quantity of waste that is coming from one company, because that was one challenge they mentioned. So will they be able to deal with the waste that is coming from one company, and how often are they able to produce? Do they have the machinery to produce the fertilizer from waste? And are they having the capacity to take on all the waste that is coming from one company? Apart from that,
yeah, I mean, one of the things that obviously in terms of bagging and that the processing side of getting it ready for market, they were looking for machinery, but actually the process itself is very low tech. And one of the things that we saw from the report that we did is this kind of phenomenon we refer to as parallel evolution, where we saw similar business models cropping up at different places across the continent. And so this one, using black soldier fly to process biological waste. So there's one company in Ghana as well who they actually set up a sister company because they ran a guinea fowl business, and they were running a meat business. And as they were slaughtering the animals ready for market, they realized there was a huge amount of animal waste, and that just really upset them. And so they set up this facility in order to process all of the abattoir waste. And so it's a way of making sure all of the waste is used and everything is used entirely. So it's really interesting to see that cropping up all over the place. Yeah. I guess the challenge will come if it's very easy to set up, then how these businesses will be profitable and what their kind of USP will be, how they'll make sure that they can compete with one another, because the barriers to entry seem quite low. For our takeaways, what can we do?
Yeah, what can we do? So I think that's the slide we are sharing, and we prepared this quick wins, and we feel that, well, since this is a challenge, this could be a guide to producing or a guide to finding solutions to the challenges that you'd encounter on the challenge. And so this, we are each going to share which one we feel is inspiring to us or which one we are more aligned to. And to me personally, I would say the first one, which is make solutions relevant to the local context. And that is when you want to initiate a new product or a new service, then you should make sure you're not doing something above the people you're working for, but it's something that people can relate to and something that people would easily jump into because they've already seen something similar in their environment. So my colleague here.
Okay, so for me, start where you are. You don't really need everything before you decide to do whatever it is that you have to do. You can just use what is available to you and just really start it. And before you know it, you're going.
Yeah. So that was my colleague Abina, who's helping on the back end. So she was sharing her own. Joanna, which do you want to share?
I am going to say collaborate where possible, particularly when we're looking at the African context. You know, you're talking about having to take on huge parts of the value chain. And as we've been talking about in the chat and together, sometimes you rely on the design, you rely on your suppliers, you rely on multiple aspects of the process to make something fully circular, and you can't do it on your own. So if you can find businesses who go along the journey with you, or other stakeholders who will go along the journey with you, or communities, that will allow you to create a much more integrity in terms of your circularity.
Awesome. Now I would really love to hear what our participants, I think they were co-presenters throughout this session. So what do you have to say?
One thing I'm conscious of, Debs, I think we've not got too much time left if we want to get to the Q&A. So there are a few questions in the Q&A we might want to delve into.
All right. Sure.
All right.
So
yes, I think it's a good idea to jump to the Q&A because, yeah, we are running a bit short on time. The first question from Maria, from your experience and use cases, what would be the biggest challenge when trying to utilize waste and reintegrated it in the value chain?
I'll say one, and Des, maybe you can say one. I think Deborah touched on it, and that's around safety. I think particularly perception of safety is incredibly important. So I think in places where maybe there hasn't been such rigor or there isn't such trust around businesses' ability to deliver safe products, and thinking about Ghanaian context, which Deborah and I are most familiar with, making sure that there is clear safety and customers are protected, and that the perception of that being the case is really important, and that will potentially require some customer education. You know, for example, things like talking about using waste, using food waste, or using sewage to create fertilizer. Sometimes that's a little uncomfortable for people, so just helping them to understand that it's safe.
Yeah. Sure, Joanna. I think that should be the biggest based on the question, but we could also talk about logistics and transporting these waste materials to their place of use. And that could also be a challenge when you have to now go collect all these materials from one point and transport to the other. So yeah, sure. We could get on to the next question.
Since we are talking about circular cases, what would be the most, and we've seen in the poll, we have like a battle between cases, but what would be the most interesting or surprising case of reutilizing waste, if you could pick one case?
This is the call to go back to the battle we've had. If we could pick one, what would be the most interesting and surprising case of reutilizing waste? Surprising?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, I would have gone for Ecodudu, and not about the surprising part, but about the interesting part and the fact that they are collaborating and they thought through the process so that they are not starting from collecting new materials into their production line, but using what someone would have called waste, but it is actually resource for them. So that's what I'll go for.
I think just to bring in another example we haven't talked about, I noticed we had someone from Kenya in the chat. So to Robert, giving you an example, there's an organization called Chuma Goods, and they create leather products, so fashion products, shoes, whatever else, from very low grade hides. And particularly one of the things that they do, which I think is really fantastic, is they work with communities in the north where there's often drought, and these communities have cattle, and in the drought they often lose their cattle, and that's their whole livelihoods. It's an incredibly vulnerable existence, and Chuma Goods is able to work with them to actually purchase the hides from those cattle, and then they've developed and are continuing to develop non-toxic ways of curing those hides. So not using any chemicals, which is an incredibly negative part of the leather industry. And so they have been educating local communities on how to use those methods, and they've been training them and creating a lot of jobs in the north where there is less economic opportunity. And they've been doing all sorts of things like using manure and using red cabbage and using all these different things to cure those hides. So I mean, it depends what your view is on the animal industry and whatever else, and whether that fits in the circular economy. I think if you look at regenerative agriculture, it's absolutely critical. But the reality is this is a lot of people's livelihoods. And so I think the way that they are able to create solutions out of social problems is really impressive.
All right. And our last question, which is, it takes more of a broad look. We have heard recently that Africa is the continent that is most ready for welcoming the circular economy. Can you reflect a bit on that?
Joe, I'll go and then you can. But first of all, I would say this question has been slightly answered. No, has been answered in our report. So you may want to jump on that report. It's a quick read, and you can have a look at what is in there. But then with Africa, we have some kind of key items or key items for which reason we say that it is welcoming or it is ready for a circular economy. And one of it is because most of our setups are not ready. So for example, when we look at the banking sector, you'd realize that Africa is not so advanced in banking, and they use opportunities such as the mobile banking. And these are just an example of how we could just renovate and bring about new innovations. And circular economy is about renovation, and it's about initiating new innovations. And so we are that ready because we don't have systems in place for the linear economy, if I would say. And so we are able to just switch to the other side, and then we can take in all these new initiatives that are coming aboard. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is the technical term is linear lock-in, where more higher income economies have invested a huge amount in developing infrastructure that supports a linear economy, whereas where there is less infrastructure investment, there is the opportunity to, as Deborah mentioned, leapfrog. So you don't need bricks and mortar banks, you can have mobile banking, and that's it's amazing being in Ghana and just being able to send money very easily. I think that's starting to develop a little bit in Europe and North America, for example, but that's actually lagged Africa. So I think that's really cool. In some ways, there's some embedded biases in this question. Circular economy is not a new concept. It's being branded as a new concept and new ideas, but it's embedded in schools of thoughts that have been going for a long time, and practices that have been going for a long time. So, things that we can talk about in Ghana, there are certain days of the week where fishing is forbidden, so in order to respect the resources of the river. And there's a lot of kind of traditional practices that are very circular. So I don't know it's necessarily welcoming the circular economy. The circular economy is already there. In terms of looking at how food was bought, when you go and buy takeout, it's wrapped in a banana leaf. You don't get a styrofoam pack, for example. And so your takeout is inherently sustainable. For example, like anything breaks, there's someone who knows someone who knows someone who can get it fixed for you. And so the repair culture is very alive. And part of that is to do with scarcity. When you have less resources, you need to be judicious about how you use the resources that you already have. So I think a lot of the concepts are not new to people and are probably easier for people to adopt on the continent, or in certain areas and certain cultures in the continent than in other places. The challenge is, I think, the middle class aspiration that is sold to everyone around, kind of the American dream of having more stuff and owning more stuff, which is definitely a challenge. So for example, passive housing, which is housing that is by its very design requires much less energy and naturally cools and heats itself according to the temperatures. That requires certain materials. For example, traditional materials like mud housing that might be used in certain communities is actually incredibly sustainable and much better from a passive perspective, requires much less energy. But middle classes don't want a mud house because that they associate with poverty. They want a cement house with a tin roof, which requires aircon, because that's seen as aspirationally as something better. And so grappling with some of those challenges, I think is interesting. Looking at composting toilets, for example, much better for the environment. But people in some of the communities I've spoken to say, I don't want that composting toilet. I want the one with the flush, because, you know, why do you want to give me this dirty toilet? And they think that there are certain associations with that. So there are some challenges and some unlearning that may need to happen on the part of all of us in order to really embrace what's possible.
Yes, that is very true. There is and circularity for sure. It's not a new concept, but it's put in a new light recently, and of course there is a lot of still some cultural barriers that have been created by exactly this linear economy that we have been experiencing. So, but thank you very much for all your reflections, and I can see that Abena has linked already your report and your interactive map. So to all our participants, if you want to find out more about the work of Footprint Africa, you can head over to the links that are provided in the chat, and you can find the report and also a map of circular cases in Africa, which I personally found it very, very interesting to really see all the initiatives that are going at the moment right now. So you can head over to their website and you can find there a lot of information. Thank you, everybody. We thank Joanna and Deborah for such an engaging session, and very informative in the same time, a great combination. And I think it has been very interesting to hear your thoughts on these cases and that you have presented. And we are sure a lot of us are leaving with a great amount of information from today's session, especially our students who are attending this session. Thank you very much for your, yes.
Okay, so one final thing. So we are also collecting case studies across Africa. We have this huge ambition of creating a case study bank of 500 cases. So I just shared the link in the chat, but I'm going to do that again. As we go through the challenge, as we engage with the topic circular economy, I would like to welcome everyone who comes across any initiative, any circular economy initiative on the African continent, wherever, to kindly, you can send it to us. We shared our email, or you can also complete the form with the initiative if you have that information. And yeah, you're welcome to do so. So that's like, welcome you to collaborate with us to create this. Thank you. And all the best in your challenge. All the best.
Thank you very much. And I think I personally, I might have a case to add there. So I will.
Interesting.
Amazing.
Thank you, both Joanna and Deborah. It was very insightful. We will stick around a bit for questions regarding the challenge, the DANSIC Circular Challenge, if we have some participants that might have some. But for all of you, a good evening and yeah, a great week ahead. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thanks and good luck.
Bye. Thanks, Arlena.
Thank you, Deborah.